Hi everyone, it's Sandra. Oh my goodness, it's been 35 days since I've been in Peekaboo. This top paper, oh my goodness, it looks totally dry. This has got me worried. I can already see really dry conditions under this paper. I'm going to go into the bin and check to see how the worms are doing. I can see that the corners are drier than the middle, so hopefully the worms are in the middle. I still see signs of life. There's still cocoons, so there's hope. So I'm going to cut into this video to dig a little bit into the worm science on moisture preferences and tolerances of Eisenia fetida, the red wiggler. When given a choice, adult red wigglers will stay in a moisture range, according to the research, of about 50% to 80%. Here I'm finding my first living worm in this bin. Doesn't look too active, doesn't look very moist, and definitely doesn't have a lot of body weight or girth. The research also says that worm activity is dependent on moisture, with falling moisture levels leading to more sluggish worm activity. Remember, worms breathe through their skin, so the less moisture, presumably the less oxygenation the worms are getting. So I mentioned that adult red wigglers have a preference of 50 to 80%. Well, the juveniles have a preference that's more like Goldilocks in the middle, 65 to 70%. Now, these are preferences, not tolerances. The only difference is when juveniles are exposed to dropping moisture levels, like below 60%, they are going to mature less quickly. So the clitellum is going to be slower. There's a chunkier worm there. As I get more into the center, where presumably there is more moisture. So if I read the research correctly, the clitellum on juveniles will begin to develop when moisture levels are at least 60 to 70%. So it's not like the clitellum will develop slower under 60%. I think the worms just stay in a juvenile state until the moisture levels rise. So here I decided to put in some semi-composted wood chips. They are slightly damp, but being wood chips, they are going to absorb the moisture that I have in this tub of worms and overs. The wood chips are going to swell up and keep good moisture in this bin from now on. I knew we were having some hot days, so I put some water in this bin of overs that I pulled out the other day. The worms in here, see how they are nice and puffy and chunky, as Jane from Rockin' Worms likes to call them. I found an old t-shirt in my castings tote where I pulled these worms and overs. So I'm just spreading the t-shirt out so the worms can find their way out of it. And also that will help the t-shirt spread out its nice moisture all over the surface of those wood chips. So the research definitely supports that when moisture levels drop, the worms are going to lose weight. And so what they call the total litter mass, that's the total weight of all the population of your worms, is going to decrease as moisture levels drop below 60%. Now, I should mention that I did a dried out cocoon experiment a couple summers ago, and I'll put a link to it in the description, where I had some cocoons in absolutely bone dry soil, and I revitalized them to living worms. So you got to watch a couple of those videos. It's absolutely fascinating. All right, so I'm giving a feeding, not a huge feeding. It's got some moist paper towels and napkins in there to make it look bulkier than it actually is. Got some onion skins and some peelings and stuff in there. These napkins and paper towels are going to be a much faster carbon than those wood chips for the worms to because I'm sure they're hungry, because I'm sure they can't eat in dry conditions either. So as long as I can untangle these napkins here, the worms will be able to get into this thin carbon quite quickly. Now, the wood chips being slightly moist and on their way to being decomposed, they will be coated in great fungi and other microbes, so the worms will love crawling around those wood chips and getting into those as well. So they're not only going to help retain moisture in the bin, they're also going to give the worms some much needed food. So getting back to the body weight of worms, as I just add some pulverized eggshell here and a little bit sprinkling of cornmeal, the research showed that with Eisenia fetida, they can lose 61.6% of their body weight when they are placed in drought conditions, and that they can stay alive for up to a month in those conditions. And when placed on a moist surface or in a moist environment, they will revitalize. I'm just adding some more moist wood chips here. I actually did a short video where I found a worm semi-dehydrated on our driveway, and I watched how it revitalized on a moist surface, and I'll put a link to that in the description as well. You can see that those wood chips actually came along with a worm, which is great. Like I said, they are being in that tote for months in a state of decomposition. So I have great hopes that the worms that are in Peekaboo here, they're obviously not as visible as I'm used to. They have lost body weight. They need to plump up again with this moisture that I've added to this end of the bin. I think they'll have no problems crawling into the side with greater moisture, so I don't think I have to give moisture to both sides of the bin. Although what I did do is I took the paper towel, or rather the sheet of newspaper that was on the top of the bin. Here I'm just putting some visible worms that I saw on the top onto the moist half of the bin. What I did is I took the newspaper that was so crunchy and dry on the top of the bin, and I put it in one of those tubs of rainwater that I have on my patio and made it in a drenched state so that when it goes on top of the wood chips here, it's similarly really, really moist. And what I'm going to do is on the end of this video, I'm going to come into this bin and I'm going to videotape what this end of the bin looks like, see how many worms are in the feeding zone just a few days later. So stay tuned and watch for that. Okay, so it's only been 3 days, but I really want to take a look at this bin. So we know that dried out cocoons will survive. According to the research, worms can lose up to 38 to 39% of their body weight. They're going to become more sluggish, but they can withstand that for up to a month, so they will survive. You can see the newspaper is still nice and moist, and it looks like some moisture has even evened out under the bubble wrap into that drier end that I didn't separately moisturize. Let's see if 3 days is enough to take a look at the feeding zone. So when worms are sluggish and dehydrated, you're not going to be able to see them as well in the material. So what looked like an alarming case of I'd lost a bunch of worms might just have been they were a bit shrivelly and they were sluggish. Oh, that's a stick, not a worm. So let's go down into the feeding zone. Now, I did add a few more worms to this bin, but I'm just looking to see whether we've got a show of worms. I am seeing movement. So yes, so rehydrated worms are going to be moving. They're going to have that body weight back again. So this looks like a much more typical worm than I was finding before. This end has great moisture. It's probably in that 65 to 75% zone that the research said is a preference for worms. I can see a few fruit flies coming up from all that food that I gave. This bin is outdoors right now, so I'm not worried about that. So not seeing anything like a worm ball for sure, but certainly lots of living worms. Let's take a look quickly into the dried out end and see whether we see any worms down here. Now I buried some carbon. I'm not seeing any worms down in the dried end. Like I said, it's not totally dry. In fact, yeah, it's not maintaining a firm fist when I let it go a little bit. So it's definitely not bone dry, and it's certainly, I think, I would guess at that 50% threshold, if not slightly above. So certainly well within the tolerance of these worms. All right, everyone, what I'm expecting then with Peekaboo over the next little while is those cocoons that are in here are going to mature. The worms that were in this dried out zone will make their way over here to the more moist zone, and we will see a bounce back of the population as the worms plump up again as they find improved moisture conditions. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye for now.